Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1044 for February 18th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
The single malt has been it has been an adventure because we didn't know exactly. You never know when you're talking about like what it's going to be in the lab versus what it's going to turn out as your final product several years later. But it's turned out really nicely.
Andrew Mackay is the master blender for Bulleit and was responsible for creating the new Bulleit American Single Malt Whiskey. We've had a lot of questions since the news of this whiskey broke earlier this month, and Andrew joins us to answer those questions. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition, finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie, a climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast, Redbreast. Pass it on.
Hey everyone, it's me, Gabriel Cardarello with Jures, and I'm here to introduce you to something very special. We've gone and blended the time-honored whiskey craftsmanship of Scotland with the whiskey-making finesse of Japan. And let me tell you, it's something truly remarkable. More on that in a minute.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Lots of unhappy news for the whiskey industry this week. Scotch whisky export numbers plunged in 2023, according to new data released by the Scotch Whisky Association. The value of exports was down by 9.5%, while volume dropped by 19% year over year. Exports to the U.S., traditionally the largest export market by value, were off by 7% as consumer spending contracted in the wake of inflation and economic concerns. The SWA tried to put a brave face on the report, comparing it to the pre-pandemic year of 2019. Here's SWA economist Catherine First.
The sector has exhibited an increase in value compared with 2019. This demonstrates the industry's resilience and growth trajectory when viewed against pre-pandemic benchmarks, underscoring a positive long-term trend despite short-term fluctuations.
When you compare 2023 to 2019, the value of Scotch whisky exports was up by 14%, with volume up by 3%. The Asia-Pacific region was Scotch whisky's largest regional market by value, largely based on increased exports to China, Singapore, and Taiwan. If that weren't enough, Pernod Ricard reported a 3% drop in sales for the first half of fiscal 2024, July through December, with sales in the Americas off by 7%, and the company lowered its earnings guidance for the full year. The results were in line with analyst expectations, and Pernod Ricard reported market share increases in several key regions, despite raising prices across its portfolio. Beam Suntory reported its calendar year 2023 financial results this week, too, with a 7% increase in net sales and 13% increase in operating income over 2022. The company credits increased demand for Jim Beam and Maker's Mark, along with Suntory's 100th anniversary offerings. Jim Beam sales were up worldwide by 3%, and both Maker's Mark and Knob Creek turned in 10% increases over 2022 sales. It's not all roses, though. The demand was driven largely by demand in Asia and global travel retail, as sales in North America declined by 2% as the market deals with the post-COVID environment. In other news this week, the founder of Bimber and Dunfale Distilleries is in jail in the UK, awaiting extradition to his native Poland. It turns out Dariusz Plaszewski has been using that name for the last 20 years after fleeing Poland in 2003. His real name is Lukas Radoszewski, and he was facing trial on charges of conspiracy to murder and supplying drugs, and also faced a 3-year prison term for illegally possessing a handgun. Radoszewski was arrested last month, and the judge rejected his request to be released on bail last week, citing his potential as a flight risk. There's no word on the impact of the arrest on the two distilleries. Brown-Forman has sold its Jack Daniel cooperage in Alabama to Independent Stave Company. The cooperage will continue to make barrels for Jack Daniels. Brown-Forman opened the cooperage 10 years ago and will continue to operate its cooperage in Louisville, Kentucky. As expected, Garrett County Distilling Company has named its first master distiller. Former Widow Jane master distiller Lisa Wicker started in her new role several weeks ago. She'll be overseeing production of All Nations whiskey while Garrett County's own whiskey matures. Bulleit Mackay faces a possible strike by workers at the Dalmore and Invergordon distilleries. GMB Scotland members voted overwhelmingly to reject a contract with a pay raise of between 5 and 6%. Union leaders called the offer insulting, but negotiations are continuing. No date for a strike has been set, and we should note that Bulleit Mackay is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. Scotland plans to raise its minimum unit pricing for alcoholic beverages by 30% starting in September. Health Minister Shona Robeson announced plans to raise the price for a unit of alcohol from 50 pence to 65 pence. That would bring the minimum legal price for an average bottle of scotch from £14 to £18.20 per bottle. Minimum unit pricing was introduced as a way to prevent health issues caused by excessive drinking, but nearly 1,300 people in Scotland died from alcohol-related health issues last year. That's the highest since 2008. New whiskies announced this week. Aberfeldy is looking to Argentina for its latest cask finish expression. It's a 21-year-old single malt finished in Malbec casks from the Finca Ambrosio winery in Argentina's Uco Valley. There's no word on pricing. Hunter Lang & Company is celebrating the 25th anniversary of its Old Malt cask range of single-cask bottlings with a special set of releases. The lineup includes casks from Linkwood, Blair Athol, Craigellachie, Kalila, Milton Duff, and Inchgower. Angus Dundee's Tomintoul Distillery is releasing 2 new experimental expressions, a 14-year-old cognac cask finish and a 15-year-old Madeira cask finish. The cognac cask finish is priced at £97 a bottle, while the Madeira finish carries a £110 price tag. Both are available exclusively in the UK. Dram Moore's independent bottlings are available in the U.S. for the first time. The initial release includes bottlings from Benrinnes, Linkwood, Dalyuen, and Tullibardine, along with peated expressions of Glenturret and Loch Lomond, and the Dumbarton Rock blended malt. There's no word on pricing. In the U.S., Heaven's Door is kicking off a new exploration series of bourbons, starting with a Calvados finished expression. The 5-year-old Tennessee bourbon carries a recommended retail price of $79.99 a bottle. And High West is releasing its first bottled-in-bond whiskey. It's a 4-year-old rye whiskey made with 80% rye and 20% malted rye at the High West Distillery in Wanship, Utah. It also sells for $79.99 a bottle. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening in the world of whiskey this week. Tickets are still available for the Fraser History Museum's Blue Run Spirits Night on Wednesday night in Louisville. The Whiskey Wonderland Festival is this coming weekend in Hammond, Ontario. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts kicks off its Go Whiskey Week of events next Monday. It continues through March 3rd. The Kentucky Derby Museum in Louisville hosts Four Roses Master Distiller Brent Elliott for its next Legends Series event on the 28th. And the Whiskey Exchange goes on tour with a special tasting in Bristol, England, March 6th. Finally, the Pick Away Pour Bourbon Affair is on March 9th in Mount Sterling, Ohio. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's has truly been innovative in perfecting cask finishing, which has led to exceptional expressions of our craftsmanship. This extra step allows our whiskey to further mature in carefully selected casks and marks the final stage of our double aging process, or in Dewar's case, our double aging method, resulting in unique, indulgent tasting experiences. The new Dewar's Double 21-year Mizunara oak cask finish undergoes a meticulous 4-stage aging process, including being finished in sought-after Japanese Mizunara oak casks. Crafting these casks is challenging due to the non-straight growth of Mizunara oak, and it takes 200 years for these trees to reach full potential. The result, a masterfully balanced whiskey with notes of sandalwood, coconut, and creamy vanilla, to name a few. And while it's not the easiest to find, it's an unmissable experience.
Whiskey Cast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Andrew Mackay has been blending whiskeys for 25 years now. He's the master blender for Bulleit Bourbon, along with Bulleit Rye and the new Bulleit American Single Malt. It's Diageo's entry into the American Single Malt market. That whiskey has raised a few questions since it was unveiled earlier this month, and Andrew joined me on a Zoom call this week with some answers. Well, first of all, let's talk about the Bulleit American Single Malt. What did it take for Bulleit to enter this space? Because other than Balcones, Diageo had not done American Single Malt up until now.
This is true. And I think it was identified as a natural place for Bulleit to explore. We started off in like pilot lab scales just to see if we liked what we would be able to create. But there was an appetite to try to move it to a larger scale production and definitely innovate in that regard. So that happened. Yeah, that happened back in like the startups. So I think it would have been in like 2017, 2018. That's when it would have been when we were first looking at it.
I've received a lot of questions since the announcement. The most often question that I get, the most often asked one is, did Diageo produce this themselves? And I know the answer to that is that it is sourced, and you can't say where. Yeah,
this is true. But it is actually like there was a lot of work done at the front end in terms of what kind of, the mash bill is pretty straightforward, but the sourcing of the grains, the sourcing of the yeasts, which yeasts we used, how we wanted it to be cooked, how we wanted it to be distilled, all of that kind of stuff. We were definitely involved in right from the get-go and keeping a close eye on it. And I have to say, that's one thing about this brand. It's brand new, and it's a new category in a sense, at least in the United States, how it's going to evolve from a flavor point of view. That's been one of the most interesting things about it.
How so?
Well, I mean, the mash bill is pretty much fixed under the law, or at least the tentative law, the way it's been laid out. How else can you play it? Well, yeasts, processing, distilling capabilities, your maturation and what you choose to do with it, what kinds of barrels you use, how you try to link it back to the Bulleit brand, and how those flavors, what we're looking for in the flavors for Bulleit bourbon, and then what we look for in the American Single Malt. So all of those things affect what the final product came out to be. And I don't think we're going to stop evolving, to be honest.
How do you make a product that is completely different from Bulleit bourbon, but yet has to have some of the same characteristics?
You aim for certain flavors, right? Certain sensory flavors. Bulleit, if you're talking about the Bulleit bourbon, it's definitely got a fruitiness that is associated with bourbon, but it's also got the rye spicy going in our version of a bourbon. We've also got Bulleit rye. So the rye spiciness figures prominently in what we try to do. The types of barrels that we use and how we age it, what that will look like, also will influence things. The yeasts that we use to produce the particular flavors within the various mash bills that we have. How do you use all of that as a whole to try to link it to the single bourbon? The single malt, forgive me. You have the same people looking at it like myself who think in terms of Bulleit and what the category should be for Bulleit, which is fruity mostly. That's what we aim for. And I must admit, I was pleased with how this came out. Have you had a chance to taste it?
Yes, I have.
Okay, sorry. I'll let you ask the questions.
No, that's okay. No, I had a chance to taste it. Thought it was very interesting, very fruit forward.
Yeah, I particularly, did you try it at a lower strength or at bottle strength?
I tried it at bottle strength.
The bottle strength really surprised me how, like, a lot of the stuff, the characters that I saw there, that sort of sweet toffee-like caramel, I only usually see that in older products. So it isn't, we won't talk about what age it is, but let's just say it emulates something that I connect with older products than it actually is. So in that respect, it was a very pleasant surprise.
How do you make it taste older when it isn't older?
That is a nice thing. And this, as of this week, we were looking at the most recent. We survey the products here in the lab, and as they hit a certain age, right, 3 to 4 years of age. And we've just looked at the most recent productions that came through, and they were like, some of them were awesome, like really knock your socks off fruity. So it was a really it's been a journey along the way. And I think I've had the luck of being able to watch it from a distillation point of view and now a maturation point of view and see it evolve, because we've been making changes as we go forward to try to make it better and better and better. So it's nice to see it appearing as the maturate now. So, yeah, I think it's only going to get better.
Is there any chance that you might bring distillation in-house, since you've got the 2 distilleries in Shelbyville and Lebanon now?
I think I can say that's a safe bet.
In other words, you're already doing it.
Yeah. How much I can actually say? It's like, I just say I think it's the safe bet that would be the direction we would take things. Yeah.
Because I know there are plans to make this a long-term
SKU. Oh, it is. I mean, we categorize things into what we call limited time offers and permanent SKUs, and this one looks like it's going to be a permanent SKU.
Let's talk about the growth of the American single malt market overall. You're still waiting for a decision from the TTB on what exactly this category is going to be. But how do you make a whiskey that goes along within what's been proposed while not knowing what the final rule is going to be?
This goes, I mean, if you go back to, was it Taft back in like the early 1900s, who helped like build that whole pigeonhole of the U.S. regulatory system for whiskeys. I always like the fact that when the lawyers tell me about this, they say it's like, yeah, he built a compromise that nobody liked. So yeah. I thought, yeah, that's, it's the same kind of thing being built. And a lot of it was a chicken and egg argument. What was the definition of a whiskey or a bourbon or a Tennessee whiskey, whatever? It was the chicken was defining what the egg was going to be, but the egg was going to then be writing what the chicken was going to be again and again and again. So it was fun to see it repeating itself. The industry is handing back our take on what we would like it to be. But it's not just Diageo, but I believe everybody in the industry who was interested in this gave their opinions back to the TTB. So to see it evolve and change, I know my 2 cents, if I'm allowed to talk about my 2 cents, is I was like, well, we're so connected to rye. Why can't we make it a rye malt? And I found out that that's one of the caveats they put in. It's like, if it's not a barley malt, then you have to put in that it is a rye malt, which I understand from the mind of the consumer. If we had a rye malt and a barley malt, we called it a single malt for both, you'd get 2 very, very different products. So spelling out to the consumer what it is, I think will only help things. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see where things take us.
Let's talk about your history as a master blender. Let's go through the CV. Where all did you start and how did you get started?
Nepotism. That's the only way you get this job. It's not the only way nowadays, but I don't know. It's just, my dad used to work for Seagram's. So I was doing a double major, and I ended up being hired for the summer in the chemistry lab. But I got to work with the chemists and the microbiologists and the pilot lab doing yeast experiments. And then down the hall was the blending lab. And in the mid to late 90s, they hired me to work in the blending lab full time. And I celebrated 25 years actually back in October. So 25 years of blending. And so I worked in the blending lab for between that time and 2015, blending all the Canadian whiskeys. And then in 2015, they moved me down to Kentucky because we were starting off the distilleries in Kentucky, and they wanted a blending south, somebody to help guide them and give them rapid feedback into their distilling products, help guide them through that process, and then guide us through the whole blending of Bulleit bourbon, Bulleit rye. I took on the U.S. portfolio, and I've been doing that ever since. And I've been very lucky working the job that I have is great, but connected to a distillery is fun. Being connected with being able to hire people and bring them up as blenders. It's been a fun and entertaining ride. So yeah, 25 years later, it's still a fun ride.
Explain to me the difference between blending for Crown Royal, which has 50-some ingredients, and blending for Bulleit, which you're trying to, essentially you've got one ingredient, but a bunch of different barrels.
Well, yeah, you'd think so. There are some parallels. The evolution of Crown, I mean, if you go back 1939, you've got 50 different things. You've got 5 very large, widely different ingredients. You've got a bourbon style, Canadian bourbon style. You've got rye, you've got coffee rye, you've got continuous whiskey, you've got batch light whiskey. These will help define what it will look like. And the use of the barrels will also help define what the overall blend will look like. The things that I transport, and like you would think, come down into Kentucky, hey, it's bourbon, right? How complicated could it be? It's one thing. But in fact, it is a very complicated thing because we have 2 mash bills. Actually, we have 2 usual mash bills. We ended up with 4 different mash bills as we've moved through time. And 5 different yeasts spread across those mash bills. And it's amazing how many different flavors you can get. And I'm looking forward, frankly, to the simplicity of having only Shelbyville and Lebanon inventories to work with, because that will greatly diminish the complexity of what Bulleit is.
That's almost a Four Roses level of complexity between 5 different yeasts and 4 different mash bills.
Yes, you go back in time and you'll find there are some similarities there. Yeah.
I'm just determining, because Four Roses likes to talk about their 5 different yeast strains and all that. So I'm just that's one of the few bourbons I've heard of that has a similar complexity.
Yep.
In terms of its origin story.
Yeah. We're very closely related, family-wise. Yeah. The way they do things and the way Seagram's did things and the way Four Roses then did things and the way Diageo did things, they're all very, very similar. And to this day, I think the way they code things and the way they appraise and organize their information from a sensory point of view is very similar to the blenders that we have now.
I want you to take me through the triangle test.
The triangle test is not something that we usually use, not as a rule. The blenders use a different kind of test. The triangle test is a great test from a mathematical point of view. You have enough people, you have 3 samples in front of you, 2 of them are the same, 1 of them is different. That's the way it's supposed to be. You look at them from left to right, you make a decision which one is the odd one. But you need 2 things for this to work well. You need a lot of people and you need a lot of sample. So from an efficiency point of view, that is you will get an answer about what if there is a difference mathematically, statistically, and it will be accurate, and that's good. The trouble is it takes a lot of time, people, and effort and liquid to get it done. This test that we use is sort of a repeated paired comparison test. I don't know if you've ever heard of a 5-way test.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The 5-way test. The 5-way test only takes 2 people, and it takes only a total to be poured. The advantage that it has, the disadvantage of it has, is that mathematically it's not supportable. From a practical point of view, if you're an honest appraiser, and I mean, if there's only 2 of you, you better be honest. You basically run into this system where not only does it give you confidence if you can see a difference between 2 samples, it also gives you a direction. Because if you do see a difference and you pick it 5 times in a row, then if you can pick it 5 times in a row and you're describing it at the same time that was the difference, then you have a pretty good idea directionally what that difference is, which the triangle test doesn't give you.
Triangle test is more for the distillers to measure quality coming off the still, right?
Yeah. But again, you need a lot of people to do it. But having more people trained to look at the liquid, I'm all in favor of that.
How much fun do you have on a daily basis?
If I could get out of meetings, a lot. Even the meetings can be entertaining. The people that we work with here everybody is passionate about this work. There's something about the whiskey industry that makes people passionate about what they do. And it transcends whatever your title is. I know, I get the master blender title, which is, fantastic. But the guys who are operators, they're just as valuable. They're doing really valuable work. And we always joke that we transform, millions of dollars into millions of dollars of profit and all that kind of jazz. But, that's what the blenders do. But we can't do it without the operators, the guys running the dry house, the guys looking at the grain and making sure that the grain is correct and good and smells right. Even you talk about the procurement people who go and get it and set up the contracts. If you go on, level and level and level, but everybody contributes. We just happen to have the job where you get to sniff the stuff.
And you get to talk about it too.
Bingo. Yes. Every so often they let me out to go talk to people.
I think that does it. Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
Not really. I mean, the single malt has been it has been an adventure because we didn't know exactly. You never know when you're talking about like what it's going to be in the lab versus what it's going to turn out as your final product several years later. But it's turned out really nicely. So yeah, it was. I'm not going to say it was a surprise, but it's always good when it works out.
Thanks to Bulleit's Andrew Mackay for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the All Nations Barrel Proof Whiskey that I mentioned during the news. It's bottled at 59.6% ABV, and the nose has notes of caramel, cherries, red apples, honey, and vanilla. The taste starts off with cherry cola sweetness balanced by black pepper, clove, red apples, leather, tobacco, and vanilla, while the finish is long and peppery. I'm scoring All Nations Barrel Proof a 91. Next up, let's look at the second release of Jack Daniel's 12-year-old Tennessee whiskey. This one is bottled at 53.5% ABV, and the nose has touches of black cherries, blackberry jam, molasses, and butterscotch. The taste is thick and chewy with allspice and peppercorns, complemented by dried fruits, molasses, and caramel candy. The finish, long and sweet with lingering spices and hints of dried fruits and brown sugar. I'm scoring batch number 2 of Jack Daniel's 12-year-old a 93. Now let's turn to 2 new releases from Bruichladdich. First off, the Bruichladdich 18-year-old. It's bottled at 50% ABV and includes Sauterne and port wine casks in the maturation. The nose is malty with lemon zest, brine, heather, dried flowers, and honey. The taste is tart and lemony with lemon pepper spice, barley sugar, raisins, figs, and honeycomb. The finish is long with a slightly mineral character and touches of peaches, apricots, and dried flowers. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich 18-year-old a 93. And finally, the new Bruichladdich 30-year-old. It's 100% bourbon cask matured and dates back to before the distillery closed in 1994. It's bottled at 43.2% ABV, and the nose has touches of coconut, dried flowers, pears, lemon zest, and hints of spice. The taste has notes of toasted oak, dried fruits, honey, chocolate fudge, and a slightly floral character with just a hint of sea salt. The finish has a nice balance of sea salt, coconut, oak, vanilla, and honey. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich 30-year-old a 95. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,600 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is brought to you by Waterford Whisky. After I posted the news about Pernod Ricard's earnings and the Scotch Whisky export data in the WhiskyCast community app, Rick at the Whiskey Zone chimed in with this comment. While I'm devastated that some top-level executives at some multinational drinks companies might get smaller sales bonuses this year, perhaps down here at the street level we'll see some price reductions. A boy can hope. Not likely. On that note, Chris Ratcliffe posted this in the app. What has happened to duty-free whiskey prices? Just passed through Terminal 4 at JFK, and bottles all seemed more expensive than buying outside the airport. Regular Blanton's was $115. The Uncle Nearest 1854 was $57 compared to $49 at a local liquor store. And Knob Creek 9-year-old seemed about the same as retail given 1 liter versus 700 ml. Even things on promotion like Suntory AO and Hibiki were noticeably higher than local retail. Is this a result of mixed domestic and international flights? Is there no actual tax saving going on? Well, you have to keep in mind that travel retail is not always the bargain it's been made out to be in the past. Canuck Sloth responded with this. It really depends on the product. Some shops, if you order online at least 48 hours before, you get 20% off. I paid $60 US for Bowmore 10 Aston Martin, $62 for Bushmills 10 Sherry Cask Finish, and $52 for Aberfeldy 18 Normal Cask. Any of their non-travel exclusive products were more expensive than what prices are where I live after the exchange rate. And Pete at Whiskey Ranked agrees. In general, I find the shops run by Heinemann's to offer little to no savings over non-duty-free shops. I assume this is effectively a transfer of the tax into revenue for the distributors and producers rather than a savings to the consumer. If you have something you'd like to add to the conversation, download the WhiskyCast community app from the iOS App Store or Google Play and jump right in. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and X at WhiskyCast, and my email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whisky on the web at waterfordwhisky.com.
Every Irish single-farm origin gives completely different flavours when it's malted, fermented, distilled and matured. That's why we're exploring Irish terroir. Imagine how many flavours we find working with over 100 of them. Waterford Whisky, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. Stills today are universally made of copper and stainless steel, but that wasn't always the case. In the James Eady Limited book, The Distillation of Whiskey, Notes and Observations on its Historical and Practical Aspect, 1927 to 1931, the authors devote a couple of pages to the subject of wooden stills, noting that many Canadian distilleries of the 19th century used wooden stills, heated by steam, of course. They note an 1838 book by an author named Morwood called History of Inebriating Liquors in their research. Apparently all of the vessels, pipes, and everything except the boiler were built out of pine. The Canadians weren't the only ones, though. Wooden stills were also used back then in Germany and Austria, once again with steam as the heat source. Wonder what those spirits would have tasted like. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American Single Malt movement, exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American Single Malts to their Baby Blue Straight Corn Whiskey and Texas Rye Bottled in Bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this episode of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast, or you can use the WhiskeyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple and Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double Double 21-year-old Mizunara Oak Cask Finish is like a worldly whiskey adventure you simply can't miss. Courtesy of your friends at Dewar's. Savor it responsibly. Copyright 2024, Dewar's Blended Scotch Whisky, 46% alcohol by volume.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskeyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.